Mass Effect is a series famous for its characters. Mass Effect 2 specifically is a game built on complex and interesting characters. Garrus, Samara, Miranda, Legion, so many lovable and fascinating personalities that give the game its charm and its replayability. And also, Jacob is here. Everyone in Mass Effect has a thing. Garrus is snarky, Samara is wise, yet hard to understand. Miranda is a Cerberus bitch. Jacob's thing is... everyone in Mass Effect has an interesting backstory to learn about. Thane is an assassin, trained from birth by jellyfish to become the ultimate living weapon, but then he quit to raise a family until his wife was murdered. Miranda was genetically engineered by an egomaniacal billionaire to secure his dynasty. She escaped and joined a terrorist organization for protection. Jacob was, maybe you think I'm being harsh right now, although, to be honest with you, I've yet to meet a hardcore Jacob stan. He does have a backstory. He was a Corsair, a group of rogue soldiers operating outside of jurisdiction, which is neat, I guess. And I guess if you push it, Jacob does have a thing. His thing is being boring. And that makes him interesting. In a game filled to the brim with interesting characters, what makes the boring one? If for some reason you're watching this and haven't played Mass Effect 2, I mean, first off, what the hell are you doing with your life? Go play Mass Effect 2. And second, let me give you the basic rundown. There's a bunch of evil aliens kidnapping human colonies, and Commander Shepard must recruit a team of specialists for a suicide run on their home base. You've been put to this by a shady organisation called Cerberus, who just spent the last 2 years bringing you back from the dead. Jacob is one of the 2 Cerberus squad mates on your team, the other being Miranda, meaning unlike everyone else where a mission is required to bring them onto the team, you start the game with Jacob and Miranda. In fact, Jacob is essentially the first person you meet in the game. So who is Jacob? Well, Jacob is a former Alliance Marine and Corsair. He's a survivor of Eden Prime, that's the attack from the beginning of the first game, and after leaving the Alliance he stopped a Batarian bioweapon from killing the Council and joined Cerberus. When you meet him, he's serving as Chief of Security for Project Lazarus, the project that brought you back to life. He's doing a great job of it. Personality-wise, Jacob is a very typical soldier. He enjoys a good fight, he makes the occasional quip, he follows orders. His room of choice is the armory. Oh, also, he's a biotic with access to magic-based telekinesis. If Mass Effect 2 was a comedy, then Jacob would be the straight man. He has a pretty average origin story, especially compared to the rest of the team, and his personality is not extreme in any direction. He's a very normal sort of guy. I'd almost label him as a kind of audience insert character. That sounds fine, but there's a major problem with that. Mass Effect is a video game, and Jacob isn't the character you play as. You can't really get more audience sincerity than a character that you literally control. In a story with weird and wonderful aliens, you need to have a character that asks stupid questions. If you look at the entire team, then that's obviously the role Jacob would fill. He's a human with only a small amount of experience dealing with aliens, but this is the team. You play as the leader, and Shepard is always the one who asks those questions because it's you, and you want to know the answers. Jacob then, like everyone else, fills the role of culture ambassador. In almost every party-based RPG like Mass Effect, each teammate is a representative of their culture, your window to learn more about their people. It's a bit of a meme at this point, but it's still an effective form of secondary storytelling. Rex, across his conversations, tells you about Krogan history, culture, politics. It's all filtered through his grumpy, cynical character, but it teaches you what you need to know about the Krogan. In Mass Effect 2, Grunt provides a fresh perspective. Rex is old, jaded, and tired. He loves a good fight, but he wants his people to be more than barbarians. Grunt is young and angry. He's a much more typical Krogan than Rex and offers a window into the more violent, repulsive elements of Krogan culture. The same can be said of human characters too. While most of us know about human culture, this is a future sci-fi setting with space magic. There's new things to learn about humanity. Kaidan serves as ambassador for biotics. He tells the story of how he was trained and exploited for his powers, how biotics are often ostracized for their abilities, and he offers the perspective that is welcoming and trusting of their new alien neighbours. Ashley is the ambassador for the average human. She talks about family, military service, the place of religion in this new galaxy. And of course, she offers the perspective that is skeptical and untrusting of aliens. Mass Effect 2 adds 5 human squad mates, so obviously obviously not all of them can serve this function. Ideally, Jacob would serve as the Cerberus ambassador, where the organisation fits into the universe and what role they serve. The problem is everyone on the ship, even the non-squad mates, kind of serve this function, and almost all of it is behind a layer of secrecy that makes you sort of doubt every word you hear. That's what makes it interesting, but the only person you can get a straight answer from is Miranda, who much more closely serves that ambassador of Cerberus role. She's the one that will passionately defend Cerberus's actions and give you a full understanding of what Cerberus operatives believe in. Jacob, on the other hand, kind of caves when you press him on it. He likes that the organisation is doing something about the missing colonists, and so he's happy to basically ignore all the shady things the rest of the organisation is doing. And make no mistake, there are some shady things being done. Jack is who you go for the counter-opinion on Cerberus. They tortured her as a child in a weird attempt to make the ultimate biotic super soldier. She is understandably miffed about it. At best you can say Jacob is an echo of Ashley, in that he's a window into the life of the average person. But Ashley served that role much better. For better or worse, the game doesn't shy away from letting Ashley be kind of racist. Despite being in a human extremist group, Jacob doesn't seem to have any opinions on aliens at all. Oh, he doesn't like assassins?
I don't like mercenaries. An assassin is just a precise mercenary.
Okay then. He mentions being in the Corsairs, this cool-sounding rogue military group, but that's it. He mentions being in it. He doesn't say anything that he did as a part of this unit. It's like a check mark on his character sheet. Okay, so he's not actually the ambassador of anything new or particularly interesting. That's fine, not every character is. Jack doesn't particularly serve that role, and neither do Garrus and Tali, since they already did that in Mass Effect 1. What makes a character interesting is not an interesting backstory. Ultimately, what makes a character interesting is that they're interesting. Jack is a tangled ball of murderous rage unlike anyone we've met in the series so far. She has deep ingrained emotional issues and she doesn't wear anything but tattoos. She's a fascinating person to get to know despite not coming from a strange alien culture. Beyond that, your squad mates often chime in on the events of a mission. The replayability comes when experimenting with different squad members, hearing what they have to say, or even if there'll be a special exchange with an NPC. Did you know that if you bring Grunt on Garrus' recruitment mission, this Krogan just shoots one of his guys' heads off?
How to live and die without fear.
I didn't know that. Let's take an innocuous example. During Morden's loyalty mission, you enter an old Krogan hospital, which prompts the other squad mate to make a comment about it. There are 5 squad mates who will make a comment here. Garrus, Tali, Zaid, Kasumi, and Jacob. Garrus will make light banter about how he doesn't like fighting through hospitals, which prompts Shepard to ask what he does like fighting through.
Repurposed Krogan hospital. Sturdy, built to withstand punishment.
That's unfortunate. Hospitals aren't fun to fight through.
What is fun to fight through?
Gardens, electronic shops, antique stores, but only if they're classy.
Tali inquires more about the hospital itself, prompting a discussion on the value of hospitals to the Krogan.
Repurposed Krogan hospital. Sturdy, built to withstand punishment.
Odd to see the Krogan devote so many resources to caring for the sick.
Hospitals important to Krogan. Sites of honor. Focus for repopulation.
The other 3 will prompt the same line from Morden about how hospitals are good places for covert genophage drops.
Repurposed Krogan hospital. Sturdy, built to withstand punishment.
What are you, an expert?
Good site for genophage drops. Efficient dispersal through clan population.
Yeah, great.
Repurposed Krogan hospital. Sturdy, built to withstand punishment.
You sound like you know the place.
Good site for genophage drops. Efficient dispersal through clan population.
Are you always thinking about stuff like this?
Not always. Sometimes I fall asleep. Repurposed Krogan hospital. Sturdy, built to withstand punishment.
You know a lot about Krogan medical facilities?
Good site for genophage drops. Efficient dispersal through clan population.
I always hated hospitals.
Ideally, every response tells us something about the character. Garrus is snarky, and he prefers to keep things light. In the presence of a dark and tense location, he makes it a joke. That Shepard chimes in also tells us that the pair are old friends. They like to banter together. Tali, being a Quarian, has an interest in sickness, and so notes it's odd to see that any Krogan would feel the same way, based on the fact that most Krogans seem a bit apathetic. The fact that she draws attention to the resources required to build it hints at her Quarian upbringing, where every resource is valuable and needs to be used carefully. Zaid asks a question, but he doesn't actually want an answer. He was just being a dick, as is his way. When Morden answers it anyway, he responds with a defeated, yeah. Great. A bit awkward that the conversation went somewhere serious. Kasumi asks with more genuine curiosity, and upon hearing the answer takes a jab at Mordin for always being so serious because she herself tends to like things easy breezy, which Mordin responds to in tow with sarcasm. Jacob hates hospitals. Laying all these examples back to back highlights just how well this game's characters are written. For one seemingly innocuous comment spawns 5 different reactions rooted in who the characters are. It also highlights how little Jacob brings to the table compared to everyone else. What can we learn from him by the fact that he's always hated hospitals? Not liking hospitals is a very average trait for a person to have. At a stretch, we can say him asking the question proves he's inquisitive, but so do Saeed and Kasumi, and they inject so much more personality into the question. I won't go through all that again, but that kind of average response is what you can usually expect from Jacob during a mission. He'll never say anything that would prompt an emotional response, of any variety. Angry, funny, sad, curious, just something that fills this spot where a squad mate is supposed to talk. And that bleeds into your conversations with him too. Part of the reason for that is that Jacob himself never seems all that invested in what he's talking about, and I don't think that's on the voice actor. Jacob is clearly written to be cool. He doesn't stress out much and he rarely shows any emotion, but there's a very fine line between cool, suave, badass and guy who isn't actually all that invested in anything. Nothing exemplifies this more than his loyalty mission. Mass Effect 2's loyalty missions are great. Deep dives into what drives each of the characters and a chance to see into their world. Tali is on trial for treason, the worst thing she could possibly imagine, confronting head-on her deepest fears as a character, her pressure to live up to her father, her loyalty to her people versus her loyalty to you, and of course a proper introduction to Quarian culture and government. Miranda for the first time shows genuine vulnerability when it comes to her sister, unable to stop her usually well-guarded emotions from spilling out. At the same time, she shows total ruthlessness to anyone who gets in her way. Jacob's loyalty mission just isn't this. It seems like it should be, but it isn't. Here's the setup. Jacob has received a distress call from the ship his estranged father was serving on. The ship went missing almost 10 years ago, but the distress beacon was only activated now. Jacob wants to go and investigate. Seems like a setup with plenty of potential, right? Maybe Jacob has some unresolved issues with his dad. Maybe he'll drop that cool guy persona for a bit and let his emotions shine through. The issues with that theory are present even in this initial discussion. Jacob doesn't have any issues with his dad. He's long since moved on. His only reason for going on this mission seems to be curiosity. When you get there, you discover lots of important and gross things. The ship crashed and the captain was killed, making Jacob's dad the acting captain. The food on the planet causes neural decay. In order to buy time to fix the distress beacon, the officers rationed the food stores and had the rest of the crew eat the local food. But when the beacon was prepared, all of the officers were killed and the beacon was never activated. There's now 2 factions on the island. The camp, which is suspiciously all female, and the hunters, which are suspiciously all male. There's no real graceful way I can say this. Rape is very heavily implied. It ends with a confrontation with the man himself, where he isn't even apologetic about it, where you can either send him to prison, leave him there to be killed by his crew, or leave him there with a loaded pistol. Obviously this is all weird and gross, especially the, I generally subscribe to the thought that if a story doesn't need to imply things, then it shouldn't imply things, but that sure is a way to remove any kind of sympathy you may have for the guy. I think the mission itself is fine. It's a weird and interesting setup anyway about fighting this weird dictator in a self-made paradise. And it would be just as interesting without Jacob there. Jacob really sums it up himself during the confrontation.
Why not me? Would 10 years of this look better to anyone else in the galaxy?
And he's right, this is a terrible situation for anybody to come across. The fact that it's his dad is almost completely irrelevant. He hasn't seen this guy for 13 years at least. He barely knows him. And in what way does this mission play into his arc or his character? Jacob isn't dealing with the burden of leadership. He isn't worried that he might be abusing his power. Jacob isn't dealing with a son of his own that he worries he isn't setting a good example for. Jacob has no daddy issues. Jacob is a chill dude. He doesn't even get all that mad about it, all things considered.
He had his fun, and now he wants out. Son of a bitch.
That's about the extent of his anger about this situation, which is really the reaction you'd expect from anyone. It stands out among all the loyalty missions as the one with the least personal investment from the person whose loyalty you're securing. I'm not even sure why contextually it makes Jacob more loyal to Shepard. It wasn't his lifelong mission, it wasn't saving his son from a life of crime, it wasn't helping him end a civil war. It was helping him find his dad, who he didn't care that much about and who turned out to be a monster. At a stretch, and I mean a stretch, he's an expecting father in Mass Effect 3, but there's one line about this mission in that game.
You still think about what happened to your dad?
Haunts me more like.
That's it. Jack coming to terms and finding closure in what happened to her is critical to her arc and appearance in Mass Effect 3. Tali's place in Quarian society and the Quarian political landscape is critical to the actual fate of the universe in Mass Effect 3. It can't really play into Jacob's arc as a character because Jacob doesn't have an arc. As I've said many times now, he's a cool guy. Nothing really phases him. He doesn't have any character flaws to work on or any trauma to unpack. He's really had his arc before the game began. I mean, I guess he does have one flaw, which we should probably unpack. Jacob is a romantic option for a female Shepard, which is really interesting to think about. I mean, before this video, it's not a romance I would ever go after because he's competing with Sensitive Snake Man and Calibrating Dinosaur. And next to those two, what exactly is Jacob bringing to the table? I mean, I guess he's kinda hot, but still, I really don't think I'm alone here either. I don't have hard numbers for you, but I do have the power of Google, so let's run a little experiment. Shepard x Garrus fan art. Lots of cute fan art here, as to be expected. Shepard x Thane fan art. A little bit less, but still plenty. A lot more sad pieces, again, as to be expected. Shepard x Jacob fan art. Not a single relevant result. The first result doesn't even contain either of the featured characters. That almost seems impossible, and yet, the facts don't lie. Well, now I've played it. It's fine. It's as you've come to expect. Average. Even in these scenes, which should theoretically be him at his most emotionally vulnerable, he never seems to drop that cool guy attitude. He's just so chill about everything. But you know, you date the suave guy, you don't settle down with him. I've had one serious relationship in my life. What the hell am I talking about? Okay, I'll admit that Garrus' romance is also kind of underwritten in Mass Effect 2, though it picks up a lot in 3. I've never played Thane's because I'm pretty sure it's extremely sad, so the competition isn't actually that fierce. What about the sex, though? Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that a video game sex scene has never not been a little bit cringy. So yeah, it's a little bit weird and awkward. That's part of the charm, right? Here's the real problem. The bloody bastard cheats on you. If you've played Mass Effect 3, then you might recall that Jacob enters a relationship with Scientist Lady, and they're having a kid. Well, guess what? If you were dating him, he goes and does that anyway.
That's hard to hear. You're a bastard.
I mean, Jacob, I know I spent the last 15 minutes calling you boring, but how could you do this to me? I thought we had something. So there you go, there's a character flaw. Infidelity. Yay? I feel in my duties as an SJW, a woke scold? Whatever the hell the word is now. I feel in my duties as a pretentious asshole that I should address the elephant in the room. Jacob is the only black squad mate in the trilogy, unless you count the voice of Ashley or Javik, and I think it's unavoidable that they play into some weird racial stereotypes here. And we're in dangerous territory already, I get that. I am as white as they come, straight from the bonny banks of Scotland. I'm not an expert in race theory, I just know some weirdness when I see it, so we're going to tread proper careful, okay? And just so we're clear, Mass Effect was written by a bunch of white Canadians, my people, so we're all fumbling around in the dark equally on this one. One of these bits of racial weirdness is the way the game plays into the myth of the absentee black father, this idea that the reason for crime rates or poverty or whatever else is due to a lack of black father figures. Now, Jacob is obviously doing pretty good for himself, but I think it's a bit iffy, to say the least, that the one Black Squad member's mission, the mission that supposedly defines him as a character, is to look for his missing dad. It's playing to some very old, very ingrained tropes. And daddy issues are not exclusive offensive to Jacob, don't get me wrong. Tally's got daddy issues, Garrus has got daddy issues, Grunt's got daddy issues, Miranda murders her dad during the third game. But you can't just throw your hands up and say, well, everyone's got daddy issues, so it's fine. There are many flavours of daddy issues, and the absentee daddy has a long history with the black community. And it is a myth that comes from the conflation that unmarried parents means fatherless, which isn't the case. At least, that's what Google tells me. I am not black or an expert in race theory. Look at me. Are you looking? Okay. Do not get your information on black people and racism from a white guy. I'll even get you started. Here's a video by T1J on the same subject. The other thing is, the cheating. It's not as well established as a stereotype, but it's definitely one I've heard before. The idea that black men are more unfaithful than white men. And the fact that Jacob is the only romance option in the series that does this to you is, it's not the best. Normally, this is the part of the video where I'd include my obligatory, a reading like this is not the developer's intention. We should look beyond the author's intentions and look at what the game is actually saying, etc., etc. And I do think it would be harsh to claim that the writers are being deliberately malicious in their writing of a black character. This is a video about how Jacob is boring, not about how he's a racist stereotype. But in this particular case, I can't be completely sure that they aren't playing to stereotypes. Consciously or not, missing black fathers are so common in media, it's entirely possible that they just assumed that's a part of writing a black character. I don't know. I wasn't there. I think regardless, having the black guy be the only romance in the series that cheats on you is fucked up. That's it really, it's pretty sucky. Maybe they shouldn't have done that. I'm guessing their thought was, well, nobody romanced Jacob anyway, so it's fine. But why even add it at all? Why did Jacob need to end up in a relationship with this lady, no matter what? What about this relationship is a culmination of his arc? Is it because you needed a reason for him not to join the squad? Is that really it? Weird. Weird and bad. Speaking of weird and bad, it's time for one last twist. Jacob Taylor, the guy I've been talking about this whole time, boring, average, cheats on you Jacob, was the star of his own video game. Mass Effect Galaxy was a top-down phone game released in the lead-up to Mass Effect 2. You play as Jacob, and it's the story of him meeting Miranda and stopping some Batarian terrorists. The story he tells you in Mass Effect 2. The game was pulled from app stores in 2012, giving it a whole 3 years where you could actually play it. I'd be shocked if you've ever seen this game. As far as I can tell, there is only one playthrough of this game on all of YouTube, and it only has about 35,000 views. Cheers, Temujin. Thank you for your service. In case you can't tell, this game is really bad. You don't even control where Jacob shoots. He does it automatically and you tell your phone to make him move. In between these awful combat sections, you play these graphic novel style sections as Jacob. That is Jacob, I swear. I'll be honest, I don't hate this art style. It's super stylized, but I think if they were to make another graphic novel in this style, I wouldn't be mad. You remember at the top of the video where I said Jacob's position on the crew seems like the POV character. Well, here you go. Jacob in this game has Paragon and Renegade type responses just like Shepard. 2009 was a different time for phone games. This is long before the era of Candy Crush and Clash of Clans. Back then, companies like EA were trying to push the iPhone as a new gaming platform, meaning I think they expected people to play this game. There's a couple of direct tie-ins to this game, like this guy, Ish, who shows up on Omega. Obviously, Mass Effect 2 was in production when this game came out. A selling point of it was that Jacob and Miranda would appear in Mass Effect 2, but I have no idea how much control the writers of that game had over this one. It kind of tracks though, doesn't it? If they expected people to play this game, a game where Jacob's personality is defined by player input, then they kind of can give him a definitive personality going into Mass Effect 2. The reason Jacob feels like a boring player stand-in character is because he is one. You're just not playing him in this game. His backstory, a Corsair, really vague for a squad mate, but perfectly fine for the player character. Jacob was a Corsair, Shepard is an N7. It's fine, just an excuse for the respective combat ability. His dialogue, boring and average compared to the rest of the team, makes perfect sense as the neutral option between Paragon and Renegade. I have no way to confirm this theory, but it fits. If they expected people to recognise Jacob as the Galaxy guy, for that to be his interesting backstory, then I can see why they would write him the way they did. I know I've spent the last half hour poo-pooing Jacob, but I don't hate him. Hating him would require having some emotional response to him. Like, I kind of hate Zaid let the civilians burn to death Masani, but that's because he actually evokes an emotional response. Jacob is fine. Mass Effect 2 has enough interesting characters to compensate for one boring one. I love the Mass Effect trilogy. I've played it a dozen times, and while it has many flaws, I wouldn't class Jacob as one of them. Apart from all the weird racist stuff. If you are one of those mythical magical Jacob stans, please tell me why. I do not understand you. And if you genuinely romance Jacob on your first playthrough, wow, I'm so sorry. What a prick. Yes, I would agree. Unlike WandaVision kind of only works as a TV show, I think this one, if you trim some of the fat, could work as a movie.
Yeah, I think this very easily could have been a film. I think that WandaVision, that had to be a show. You know, they want their Disney Plus content, and on the surface of it, give the two sidekicks that were too boring.